Welcome to Corporation. WBC is a non-profit media organization registered in Minnesota, United States, to serve the Oromo community in the diaspora and back home through various programming. Welcome to the show. My name is Milko Badasso. I will be your host for the day. And today I am joined with three guests, being Professor Mohammed Tahiro, Dr. Hussein Hamda, and last but not least, Professor Abbas Nyamo. So today we will be focusing on the current issues of the Horn of Africa with focus on Ethiopia. So we're just going to get right into the first topic. I'm going to start with you, Professor Abbas. How do you assess the current political and security situations in the Horn of Africa region?
Thank you, Milko. Thank you to have you back, and I'm pleased to discuss this issue on the Horn of Africa. As you know, the Horn of Africa is generally a conflict-prone zone. And of course, over the last few years, especially over the last 6 months, things are going for the worse. There are internal conflict and interstate conflict. The first one is, of course, the Ethiopian government's attack on Tigray regions under the cover of law enforcement. But of course, which many people consider to be a total open war. That, of course, is simply a huge war which led to the displacement of tens of thousands of people, and of course internally displaced people, and also this war involving naturally the Eritrean region. Mr. Isaias naturally sending a huge contingent of fighters in the northern region of Tigray, and so there is also the Amhara elements called the Amhara elements, militias participate in this war. So more or less, since there are three coalitions, what we call Triple Alliance, involving Eritreans, the Amhara militias, and the Abiy government, which simply led to the months war. So the war is not over. Of course, the government claims it is over, but according to many analysts, for the war is far from over. So a lot of human tragedies, displacement, and also rape by soldiers, a lot of looting happening there. So on the other hand, I think very importantly, there is also a border conflict between Ethiopia and Sudan. Of course, the Sudanese government simply occupied part of what Ethiopia claims to be Ethiopian region. And of course, the Ethiopian government theoretically claiming, of course, diplomatic route, but of course in preparation. On the other hand, of course, internally, a gross abuse of human rights taking place by the Ethiopian government since the days of Hachalu. And of course, many Oromo prisoners. There are also reported extrajudicial killings and torture. Don't forget also there are numerous intra-community conflict in Beni Shangul region involving different communities, and the conflict between the Afar and the Somalis. So you have conflict in different regions, and the Ethiopian government also making war against its own people, especially by putting the Wallagga region, the Guji region under command post. You see, whenever you look at the situation, it doesn't look like the country is in a good shape. It looks like a kind of failing and failed state because of the security and human rights situations.
And Dr. Hussein, I'm going to bring this to you. How do you assess the current political and security situations in Ethiopia? And as Professor Abbas said, there are several intervention parties who have joined, like the Amhara militia, and there is issues within the Ethiopia-Sudan border. How would you assess this situation?
Well, thank you, Milko, for having us again on this show. The Horn of Africa region has been on the spotlight, globally and regionally. There are, huge internal insecurity and lack of peace. There is also a huge humanitarian crisis. There are, immigration, migration and internal displacement of people, both in the north and elsewhere. And there is also the border conflict, the Ethiopia-Sudan border conflict. There is an international diplomatic role between Ethiopia and international community. There are issues that concern international community, such as the humanitarian access to the war area in Tigray. Even in Tigray, there is a continued, war, unlike what the federal government of Ethiopia claimed that they have completed the war. The insurgency continued, human suffering continued. There are a lot of human right abuses, and so because of this, international community is highly concerned, and there is diplomatic, challenges that Ethiopia is facing as a result. And not only diplomatically, but also withholding of aid and budgetary support, such as the EU, the UK, and the US, and the new Biden administration is also considering special envoy to the Horn of Africa, and so that shows that there is a grave concern by international community to stop Ethiopia from going into complete chaos before it is too late. And the other thing is Eritrea's intervention in Ethiopian internal affairs has become a very concerning issue. And recently, the Eritrean president Isaias Afwerki was heard to, saying a lot about his involvement in Ethiopia on its national television, and a lot of people are concerned about, too much intervention by the dictator of a country which has never held any election in the last 30 years. And so the Horn of Africa region is a melting pot for a lot of conflicts, and it needs a very critical scrutiny. There are international elements involved. The Eastern Middle East countries such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and including Turkey is now showing some interest. And so this needs a lot of considerations, both by the regional forces and the international community, including the African Union and what they call IGAD, and also the United Nations, US, and the EU.
Thank you. And Professor Mohammed, so we've seen that this has a lot of humanitarian implications, but we've also discussed the diplomatic implications of this issue. So there's renewed conflict within the Somalia region. How does this diplomatic issue affect the Horn of Africa in regards to this political climate?
Before I tackle that question, Milko, by the way, thank you for hosting us again. And I want to touch upon some of the things that Professor Abbas and Dr. Hussein and mentioned. I'm not going to go in detail because they have done a good job in that regard. The first thing I wanted to mention was the war in Tigray with devastating consequences. The Telegraph yesterday published a video showing an army officer, an Ethiopian army officer, saying we should have finished off the civilians. They have apparently massacred. You can see it in the video. They have killed a lot of people, and there were some survivors mourning and the army officer is heard saying we should have finished these guys off. So that is tantamount to war crimes. So the incursion in Tigray has really devastating consequences for the civilians. There are tens of thousands of refugees fleeing Tigray into Sudan. That's one. Two, there is the border conflict between Ethiopia and the Sudan. The Sudan claims they did so. They ventured into Ethiopia with the permission of the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, but Abiy Ahmed denies that. So really, we don't know who to trust. I have no reason to doubt what the Sudanese are saying. That is number two. Number three, Eritrea has invaded Ethiopia, be it with the permission of the prime minister. It's an invasion, nevertheless. And Abiy Ahmed has solicited the assistance of a foreign power to fight his own people. That may be the first in Africa. And that has not brought any peace in Tigray. The war is ongoing in Tigray. There is resistance, and there is the conflict is still raging in Tigray. Needless to say, Abiy Ahmed has claimed victory in Tigray. The other one is opposition leaders in Ethiopia are in jail. Jawar Mohammed, Bakala Garba, and many others. Some of them we don't know by name. They are in prison, and that hasn't brought any peace in Ethiopia. The rationale for arresting and holding people, if that is to bring peace and intimidate others, it hasn't worked. So that's another problem in Ethiopia. And there is harassment of civilians. There are arrests and arbitrary killings of civilians. Some of them are taken from jail and executed. So Ethiopia is up in flames. So the question you asked the two gentlemen was, how would you assess the current situation in Ethiopia? The security situation is really precarious. It's a very bad situation. The country is up in flames. Now, the conflict in Ethiopia has spilled over into neighboring countries. Somalia, for instance, is in turmoil. There was an assassination attempt on the president of Somalia the other day. So he barely escaped this attempt. So diplomacy works only if the government in charge would listen or to some extent budge to international pressure. And the government in Ethiopia is notorious. This government of Abiy Ahmed and the one before that is notorious for resisting international pressure. So budging to pressure is seen as a sign of weakness by Ethiopian governments, not just this, but the one before that, and then the Derg, and also Haile Selassie to some extent. So they don't have a culture of listening to the concerns of the international community. So unless pressure, not diplomatic or otherwise, mainly economic pressure is brought up on these people, I'm afraid they may not listen to the concerns of the international community. If they were intending to do that, they would have listened to the concerns of the international community. So I'm really pessimistic when it comes to that. The only thing they listen to is something that is biting and pinching, specifically economic pressure. So if economic pressure is brought to bear on them, they might listen to the international community. Short of that, I'm afraid we will see more of the same, telling the international community one thing and doing another back home. So, so my view is, in light of the videos leaking out of Tigray right now, that apparently implicates the government of Abiy Ahmed with war crimes, the international community might move much faster than it has done in the past. So far, it has been lip service, and I hope they would go beyond that and do something tangible in Ethiopia.
Thank you. So Professor Abbas, Professor Mohammed mentioned that there are Oromo political prisoners who are on a hunger strike right now. Prominent figures such as Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Garba, and other Oromo politicians are unfairly being imprisoned and have been on hunger strike for more than 3 weeks. Why is this, and what are these political prisoners demanding?
Let me add a couple of points on what Professor Muhammad just mentioned. I think the role of Eritrea is now highlighted because it is simply the group who is raping the woman. And one of the saddest story about this is simply probably 80% or 70% of the contingent is Eritrean, and it is simply invaded Tigray, and they are not willing to leave. According to the interview given by Mr. Isaias Afewerki, they are not willing actually to leave, because if he leaves, then Abiy government is weak and he can be easily defeated, and therefore he wanted to protect Abiy. So that is one thing. The second thing is also what is important to look at is simply Isaias as apparently has a bigger vision of dominating Ethiopia, because he is apparently willing to restore the old Ethiopian empire by allying with Amharas and Abiy. He thinks that he will have influence on Ethiopia. This is what I call triumvirate. You remember last time you used the term triple alliance. Now, people who are really envisaging to rule Ethiopia are not only Abiy, but also Isaias, indirectly dominating a weakened, a diminished Abiy, and the Amhara, of course, who would like to get simply the things back after simply destroying the Wiyane government. The second issue, I think the question you asked me is about prisoners. This government never respected the rule of law. That, of course, not part of Ethiopian political landscape. So also the Abiy government, which was brought by the Kero and the Kare struggle, and who many people believed would empower them, would improve the quality of democracy and the quality of federal system we had, simply turned it against the Oromo people. So the turning point came, as many of you know, with the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa in June 2020. And then by using, of course, the pretext of protest, he arrested Abiy, Jawar, and of course Bekele Garba. So mostly then they wanted to simply put them out of political game, and which simply means they invented terrorism, they invented all kinds of criminal activities for which are not really responsible. So since then, I think many people simply have been jailed, tortured, disappeared, killed, by giving them, of course, what you call Onag Shane. Onag Shane is a term now used to terrorize Oromo population, Oromo intellectuals, while for Jawar, of course, for the other leaders, it is mostly to make them out of the political landscape. So since then, of course, they are seeking for justice. What happened over the last few weeks, of course, was mostly younger people start to dress in yellow to express solidarity with them. So they were prevented to go in and simply assist the proceeding, fake proceedings. Since then, of course, the people like Jawar started to go on strike. So it is now more than 3 weeks, 23 days, which never simply is not easy. By the way, hunger is simply some of the things which are used by everyone in order to put pressure on governments. It was used globally in the United Kingdom, in France, in India, and South Africa. That was when governments were more sensible, more sensitive to the demands. These governments apparently wants not only to humiliate them, but also to kill them. So they wanted them to die in prison. So 22 days, 23 days, despite the demands coming from the family members, from activists, from the international community. I see the last one, which is, of course, written by Minnesota state legislator to liberate them. I think you must have seen the one which was released this morning. Despite this, they ignored. The objective seemed to be either they die in prison, because one of the slogan was, now Hachalu has died and killed, now Jawar remains. That means they want them to die in this situation, and therefore many of us are worried about this. We are consulting with Professor Muhammad and many other friends. What can we do? Because these people are really going to die. The government and the Naftanya wanted them to die. So we are really in dilemma, either to ask them to eat food or simply to die. So, which is simply very, very difficult. I know the situation in which the families are. So the government apparently is denying treatment. I think the government is not trusted, and I think many of you heard about what happened to Mr. Bakale Garba, who never ate a food for 21 days, and then the government wanted to force him to simply be treated in Armed Forces Hospital. When he was asked to be treated in private by private doctor, of course, that was not accepted. So basically, I think it's simply against international humanitarian law. It's simply complete abuse of human rights, neglect, and of course, contempt for the Oromo people, because the Oromo will not do anyway. So I think this is simply the difficult situation. Many people do not know what to do. We are trying to put our voice by expressing solidarity, but the government, the Naftanya, wanted to them die in prison because that's simply what they want, what they appear to want. So I think that is really a real situation, a real problem for which all Oromos inside, outside the country should come together, of course, to free them, to stand by them and with them. Because that is simply means it is humiliation. Their days means our days for many people. It's also as if they are killing Oromo nationalism by arresting Jawar, the symbol of Oromo youth, the Oromo struggle, who renewed Oromo generational struggle. Now the days, his days simply means the victory for them. So that's why the Oromo must come together, stand by him, so that they are simply free from that prison. And that's why we have to continue pressure on international government, the United Nations, humanitarian agencies, in order for them to put pressure on Abiy government to give them better treatment, and of course to release them from prison for which they are not responsible.
And I will pose the same question to you, Dr. Hussein. Excuse me. As Professor Abbas has mentioned, there's a lot of human rights violations going on, and they have arrested prominent figures such as Jawar Mohammed and Bakale Garba. How does this hunger strike affect the movement, and what type of violations are being occurred?
Thank you, Milko. I think the what Professor Abbas highlighted is a valid point, because hunger strikes is a way of asking for or demanding for a right which you couldn't get through the due law process, because the rule of law in Ethiopia has been under complete failure, in the past, decades, so to say, and particularly in the last 3 years. For example, if you have any case, you go to the court, and then you face justice, and the court decides something, and the police would not comply with the court order. The Attorney General of the government, which is the supreme office in justice, intervenes in the court processes. If you recall, the Attorney General gave a press conference once when Jawar and his colleagues were arrested, and so they had to give some explanation as to why they have been arrested. And so he came on press release and press conference and said, these are criminals. Nobody expects an attorney general to violate the rights of a suspect, because any person until proven guilty is a suspect. Is innocent. So that's number one. Law 101. And this attorney general, who they claim was a professor at Addis Ababa University, started by violating this kind of basic legal concept. And so he started from there. And now, when it comes to political prisoners on hunger strike, even the prison administration was referring to a higher body, and it turned out that higher body was the attorney general. Can you imagine an attorney general who is supposed to be, fair for the victims, as well as the interest of the government, as in the interest of the justice, coming up with this kind of very difficult position. Yes, it's an appointee of government, but there is a clear role for the attorney general to at least keep independence and put everybody under the law, the rule of law, including government. But this is not what we are seeing, and the attorney general is giving orders to the prison administration to even allow these prisoners to get medical treatment. And look, when the legal system is so failed, when you don't have any trust in the legal system, and if you are, when you are, accused of a crime that you haven't committed, what are the options? One of the options is what they did now, hunger strike. So hunger strikes have been done in the past, including during times of, freedom, struggles for freedom. Mahatma Gandhi did it. Mandela did it. Other activists did it all over the world. But we are in the 21st century. We are in a time when government should be more progressive than the times of Gandhi and Mandela. But that's not what we are seeing. What we are seeing is a very sad continuation of repression by government and government agents, including what could have been expected as independent bodies, such as the Attorney General Office, the Election Board, courts, the police, and so on. But it's very sad because the imprisonment of these people, these Oromo political leaders and members of political parties, was basically a political decision, not an arrest because of any crimes they committed. The solution lies in the politics. So that's why I don't think they are these prisoners are expecting justice from the court, even if the court, makes them free from the accusation. The police is not going to release them. So what's the other option? The hunger strike. Why? Not because they expect a lot of mercy from government, but they wanted to show that it's part of the struggle, and the international community should put utmost pressure on the government to release them. And it is in the interest of the country, in the interest of the government, to release these political prisoners because there's no crime they committed. And we know that. People know that. Everybody knows that. It is a political motivation for them to be arrested and to, use, the legal process just as a vehicle to make them out of the political, participation. And election is upcoming, and as you know, now these people are in jail and they can't take part in this election process. And so that's exactly what they wanted. That's exactly what the government wanted. And the international community should put, utmost pressure to stop the government from pursuing this wrong path, and release these people. And now it is even more than that. It's a humanitarian issue. Can you imagine having someone for more than 3 weeks on hunger strike? I mean, their life is in danger. And if their life, passes this way, the consequence, for the government would be huge. So the government has a choice: release them or face the consequences of them dying in jail. Is what I think we should send message to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. And I'm going to pose the same question to Professor Mohammed. As both the guests have mentioned, there are current human rights violations in those prisons, and this government has lacked the respect of rule of law. So why are the political prisoners so adamant, and what is the cause, and why are they fighting so hard and risking their lives for this group?
Thank you, Milko. The first thing that needs to be said is Oromo political prisoners are in jail on trumped-up charges. This is a political decision. They haven't committed any crimes. That's the first thing. Now, on hunger strike works if two conditions are fulfilled. One, if it brings external pressure on the government. So if a known or someone with a high profile is on a hunger strike, that calls on the attention of the international community, that can bring some sort of pressure on the government. Then it might be successful. That's one. The second one is if you can solicit some kind of guilt from your jailers, in this case, the government. So if the government feels guilty because you are on a hunger strike, you are at the mercy of the government after all, then you might get some kind of resolution. We know the second one is not possible in Ethiopia. This government wants them dead. They attempted to murder Jawar before he was in prison. So the second one is not going to work. So the first one might work. The international community, as we see now, there is a renewed interest with Oromo political prisoners now. And we saw what happened in Minnesota yesterday. The state legislature was talking forcefully about Jawar and how he needs to be released. Not just Jawar, but all political prisoners. So that kind of pressure might work, but I'm afraid if you are trying to appeal to their conscience, it's not going to work. Now, there is something really, really important here, okay? And that is the reason, as I mentioned at the beginning, the reason these political prisoners are in jail is because Abiy Ahmed and his government has lost the battle of ideas. So they wanted to get these individuals and party leaders and politicians out of the way so that they have no competition in the upcoming elections, so they can easily claim they have won the election. So everybody knows that the previous government did that, and it was a sham election. And the previous government tried to make it appear it was a competitive election. They at least tried. But this government is not even trying. Now you have Jawar Mohammed, Bakele Garba, all of the political leaders that who are Oromo, and the government is getting ready to hold elections. And you know that election is not going to be accepted by the people in Ethiopia. It's not going to be accepted by the international community. It's kind of like they're thumping their nose at the international community and at the people. Everybody knows this is not a real election. It's not competitive. It's not free and fair. And they are holding the election nevertheless. So, the government in Ethiopia is really trying to do everything it can um, to hold elections that are not really fair and free. So that's all I can say about this. My colleagues have answered the question really satisfactorily. I have nothing more to add to that.
Thank you. And Professor Abbas, back to you, as both Professor Mohammed and Dr. Hussein have mentioned, there is planned elections in May of June 2021. The general elections back in August 2020 were postponed, and they were postponed due to coronavirus as inflicted by the Ethiopian government. So, and many leaders such as Jawar Mohammed and members of opposition parties have been imprisoned, as you've all mentioned, and most other offices have been closed. So how do you assess this election going forward and the political environment around this election? Professor Abbas.
Thank you. I think Professor Mohammed partially touched up on some of the key points. I think no one believes, except maybe the devil, who may believe that election will be fair and honest. So, by the way, Ethiopia is not known for democratic elections, for tolerance, political traditions, and political culture. Many people believed maybe this guy called Abiy would help us at least to move forward. So what is happening is simply the repetition of history, because Ethiopia used to be governed by the Amhara, who was autocratic, and then it was replaced by a junta, they called junta kleptocratic regime, which Abiy served. Many people didn't believe Abiy could be a democratic leader because he didn't have any democratic credential. He was a security man. He was simply an agent. He was part of what you call OPDO system. But still many people believe, thanks to the pressure, will be entering into another phase in terms of democratization. What we are seeing, of course, over the last you have been seeing over the last 2 or 3 years is the opposite. So the first thing, I think, Abiy was not elected. He is for what you call junta. He typically fulfills what you call the definition of junta. So he simply promised that you organize free election. Instead of doing that, so what he was really aspiring for is simply to return Ethiopia's past, which is imperial, Menelikian thought and philosophy, which is unitary state, which is simply dominated by one group. So the reason why he got acceptance from the Amhara, maybe from Isaias, who doesn't believe in democracy, is that there will not be elections, free elections. So in order for election to take place, you need one thing, which is, of course, free and fair, open election, competitive election. Not in order not to do that, therefore, he marginalized the key opposition, except surrogate parties like Izema. Izema is, I think, mostly surrogate. When I say surrogate, it's simply a party which is affiliated to Abiy, parties which are really working hard to destroy federalism. So all parties which have meaningful support, social support, political support, naturally have been marginalized, divided. What they did with OLF is simply interesting. He tried to destroy OLF by dividing them into pieces. And of course, he marginalized the remaining leaders. And the only influential people, of course, which matter in this election is simply Jawar, Bakala Garba, and Oromo Federal Congress, which got support, mass support, when they went to southeastern Oromia. So what is happening now is simply it cannot be free and a free election, because there cannot be election under this condition, where leaders are imprisoned, where, of course, people cannot have campaigning routes, because they cannot campaign. The offices are being closed, and even let alone campaigning against them. Even if you are suspected of supporting opposition parties, you are either killed or arrested. If you are lucky, arrested. Otherwise, you are killed. So that what they are doing is simply clearing up the way for Abiy's party and his allies to be elected, and then not only to be elected, but to become majority in the parliament, where they will be in a position to destroy federalism, where they roll back all kinds of reforms we have been seeing over the last 20 or 30 years. So for that reason, I think one can say Abiy is the most anti-Oromo leader we have seen since Menelik, because simply he, I don't remember Haile Selassie. I remember the last years of Haile Selassie. I don't remember he targeting Oromos. I know also the Darg regime where we lived, he didn't directly target Oromos. Even TPLF didn't direct Oromos, although they simply oppressed the majority of the population. So Abiy is the most anti-government. By aligning with the Naftanya, therefore, what they want to do is simply to destroy Oromo nationalism, to simply destroy competitive individuals, and to simply open the door for restoring the imperial system by destroying the federal dispensation. So I don't believe there is a way of organizing free competitive election under this condition. So what I'm asking is, what the international community should do is not to recognize, not to encourage these elections, sham elections. So not to support it, not send delegations to observe it, the so-called election observers, because it cannot be democratic. And also I tell, of course, the OLF already clearly said it will not participate. I encourage also the Oromo Federal Congress not to participate in this election. I also want to ask Oromos to stay at home, because electing or not electing is your freedom, and therefore don't hang yourself. And therefore let them kill you at home and oppose this election, because election cannot take place in Oromia unless all Oromo leaders, political leaders we mentioned, many others, are freed, unless the political space is simply open for competitive campaign and of course election. So that's why I don't believe Ethiopia never had election in the past. And of course, this is not any different from the election the Mallas government and of course TPLF not organizing. For example, the last election, the fifth election, was the government claimed it got 100%. 100% means nothing else. And now it cannot be any different. It simply will composed of Naftanyas and of course politicians of the Bali who simply campaign on behalf of what they call Prosperity Party. When I say politicians of the Bali, means they deeply know that this party doesn't represent Oromos. They were the prisoners of TPLF. Now they are the prisoners of Naftanyas. So they do not necessarily represent Oromo people. So I don't really accept, they should not be accepted that this election will be held. And so the Oromo need to boycott it. And the Oromo need to continue the struggle, to ask the government, to press the government to release political prisoners, and also to make the political space open so that these people are free, and of course contact their people and campaign in order to simply organize elections. So otherwise, I think elections which are not open and democratic can lead to post-electoral violence. So sometimes it's better not to organize election if it's not democratic, because the result will be, as Professor Mohammed mentioned, it cannot be democracy, it is simply violence, post-electoral violence. So that's why the international community should not be giving any help to this kind of election, because it cannot be an election. It is pseudo-election, sham election. No matter how term you use, it cannot be democratic. It can be a recipe for civil conflict in post-election Ethiopia. So I think Oromo must boycott it collectively.
Thank you for that take. And Dr. Hussein, I'll pose the same question to you. As Professor Abbas mentioned, Ethiopia has never had a democratically elected government, and there are countless opposition leaders in prison, some who are Oromo opposition leaders who are in hunger strike right now. How do you assess the political environment and the expected outcome of this elections, as many have mentioned that this is a sham election? What is your take?
Well, I think Professor Abbas rightly described and answered your question. I just wanted to add a few things. One, free and fair election needs some conditions, some preconditions. One, a wide political space, meaning where not only incumbent government party is free to roam around and do whatever it likes, but also opposition parties. Opposition parties are an integral element in a political system. If repression by the incumbent party prevents free movement of the opposition parties, then from the get-go, that political environment is repressive. The other is institutions. So democratic institutions, such as the election board. It needs to be non-partisan. It needs to be independent. It needs to be trusted, trustworthy. And we know that the election board has already shown partisan positions. And so that condition has already failed. And look at what they did. They were going through registration of political parties. Some of these political parties have been registered even before the establishment of the election board, the new version of the election board. And now in that process, they even canceled some of the already established and registered political parties. They created a lot of reasons. They just gave a lot of pretext. One of them, for example, is that these political parties haven't held general elections. But can you imagine the Prosperity Party hasn't held any general election that is publicly known, but still they have been considered as registered. So what is this election board is doing now? Is actually doing what the incumbent party is telling them to do. And as Professor Abbas mentioned, the parties that are buddies to the incumbent party. The other one is it also needs an independent judiciary. Why? Because if there are any disputes, either in the process or in voting or in the outcome, when the results are disclosed, then this dispute can be taken to the court. And if you have independent judiciary, then you have this legal recourse to respect the voice of the people. We've seen from even the how the political prisoners are treated, that we don't have independent judiciary system. Look at the Attorney General office. Look at the police. Look at what the courts are actually doing. So that condition, those two conditions, the independence of the judiciary and independence of the electoral board, is not there. Okay, so that condition is not there. So when those conditions are not there, what do you expect? Then the actors in the election process are not fairly representative. So that's why you find, Oromo political opposition parties being, suppressed, and their offices and their leaders are not, their leaders are jailed. Some of their members are also jailed, and then their offices are closed. And it looks like only a few, like-minded political parties are playing part in this election. So in the, in a situation where you don't have true opposition, you don't expect a, competitive electoral process. So the outcome is a kind of predetermined. The incumbent made sure that it eliminated all the significant opposition parties before even election was declared, like election date was declared. And now they are just, riding and competing with themselves. No credible opposition party representing particularly the Oromo are in these elections. And so the outcome is obvious. The outcome would be the same sham election outcome that we saw in the past 5 rounds of elections. And so what's the point for Oromo political organizations, opposition parties, to take part when the environment is not allowing them to compete and present themselves as alternative political force, and when the outcome is already predetermined? So that's my take on this one, and it's very sad that when Gero and Gare gave their lives to bring about the change that happened April 2018, there was huge hope, one of which was a transition to democracy, and election being the central the central element. And now that is also at stake, and trust is lost, not only by Ethiopians, but international community has also lost trust. And so the call would be then not to take part in these elections, and for international community not to prove it. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much for your take. And Professor Mohammed, you've touched a bit on the elections and the implications of the political prisoners. If you'd like to briefly discuss the current climate and what do you think this election and the outcome will be, as the guests have mentioned. Sorry, Professor Mohammed, I think you're still muted.
Thank you, Milko. I would like to regress a little bit and talk about an issue that Professor Abbas mentioned in passing a little while ago, and that was the dilemma these political prisoners that are on hunger strike are in. As much as we admire and respect their determination and perseverance, there is one thing, and that is this hunger strike will work only if that brings some kind of pressure from outside, mainly from the people. Otherwise, as I said earlier, because the government already considers these people enemies to the extent of trying to murder them, kill them, then nothing is going to happen. So the dilemma is, should they continue with the hunger strike or try to live on and struggle another day? And that's a real dilemma. So the people of Ethiopia in general, and the Oromo people in particular, they have to pay special attention to this. And they have to know the government is not going to change anything on its own. The government is not going to budge. The governments of Ethiopia, all of them, not just the government of Abiy Ahmed, they're not known for humanitarian gestures. They're not going to budge. So some kind of pressure has to come from the outside for the questions that the political prisoners raise to be answered. Now, coming back to elections, elections are a process. You have to go through a process to get to election day. So what is that process? Number one, the political space has to be wide enough to accommodate different views and different party platforms. As we see right now in Ethiopia, the political space is not wide enough to accommodate opposing views. If your party is of a view that is different from that of the government, then you cannot do anything. You cannot campaign, you cannot hold rallies, and so on. so that the political space is not open enough to accommodate opposing views. As the two gentlemen mentioned, opposition leaders are in jail. How can you hold competitive elections when opposition leaders are in prison? It's impossible. That's not an election. That's a sham that's meant to legitimize the government's hold on power. That's the only purpose of these elections. Freedom of movement is severely restricted in Ethiopia. You cannot move around and campaign. And as you know, if you don't campaign, if you can't meet people outside of the capital, and if you can't go to Nakamte, you can't go to Asalla, you can't go to Jimma, you can't do any sort of campaigns, you can't go to Asalla. What kind of election is that? You cannot really call that free and fair by any stretch of the imagination. That is not a free and fair election. Uh, Opposition supporters, not just leaders, but the supporters themselves are in prison. You cannot openly confess that you support, for example, the Oromo Liberation Front, even though it's a legally registered party right now. You would be arrested. It's de facto illegal to declare allegiance to one of these opposition parties. So really, this is not free and fair by any stretch of the imagination. The other one is the government has monopoly over the media. Media is very important. So the only independent Oromo media that was operating in the country was the OMN. They shut the OMN down and they arrested the journalists. The OMN is broadcasting from the diaspora. Now we have others now broadcasting to Ethiopia by satellite. Even listening and watching these broadcasts is to some extent illegal. You know, they were confiscating satellite dishes. So this is not a free and fair election. We have been saying this for many, many years, even before Abiy Ahmed came to power. Elections in Ethiopia are not free and fair. They are meant to give the cover of legitimacy for a government that is illegitimate. The government of Abiy Ahmed was not elected. Abiy Ahmed was handed over the power of government to transition the country into fair and free elections. And he has not done that because process is very important, Milko. If the process is not fair, then the outcome is not going to be fair. As Dr. Hussein rightfully said, this is a predetermined outcome. We know who is going to win. And Abiy Ahmed will be the prime minister. And the parliament is going to look more like the one that they have right now. So nothing is really going to change. So it falls back to the people. You know, I keep saying it when we hold these interviews in Afan Oromo and Amharic, and you get what you deserve. So if you want something better, then you have to fight for it. And that's what I say to the people of Ethiopia. If you want something better, it's not going to be handed to you on a silver platter. You have to fight for it. And that's the only way you can get a better tomorrow. But for now, Dr. Abiy Ahmed and his government, without any shame, no shame at all, they are moving ahead with preparations for the election when Jawar Mohammed, Bakala Garba, and most, if not all, Oromo politicians are in jail. It's really sad we've come to this point, and it shows the level of disrespect the government has for the people of Ethiopia in general and to the Oromo people in particular.
Thank you so much for your take, which is, I think is very important. As you've all mentioned, there are countless human rights violations. The rule of law does not exist. Various exploitations and just various issues that are within Ethiopia. So this is the last and final question that I will pose to all of you, starting with you, Professor Abbas. Given the current situation in the Horn of Africa with focus in Ethiopia right now, the internal conflicts, the repression of marginalized groups, what would you suggest for the Ethiopian government, the people of Ethiopia, the Oromo community, and the international community to do to improve the current situation of Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa in general? Sorry, it does seem as if you're muted, Professor Abbas. If you could, thank you.
So yeah. Um, just let me add a couple of points to what Professor Mohammed and to what Dr. Hussein excellently said about this election. One of the funny thing, of course, about electoral board, who is apparently led by a credible woman who was arrested and jailed many times by the preceding government. You know what she is saying now? She was asked whether it's a legitimate thing to organize election in the situation where key leaders are arrested and in prison. She said, we cannot intervene on behalf of those who are accused of crimes and, of course, killing people, organizing crimes and terrorism. These are Jawar and the Bakale Garba. You see? Also, I think one important point, I think he appointed 4 other people a few days ago. These are all Amhara names. And Amhara names have nothing against Amhara. So there are 4 people who are judges to adjudicate electoral processes. None of them were Oromos, which simply means they are determined to steal the election. Already there is no election, that's simply to legitimize it. So I think one thing you can do, I think, to back to your question, what we need to do, I think, about this, about the whole process, I think the only thing I think we can do is simply to keep the struggle. I think the Oromos should know now, by now, they will not get their way through elections. Elections cannot work in Ethiopia. Ethiopia being created as an empire, as oppressive state, where the Oromo always had been demeaned, marginalized, denied justice, where we believe that we brought one of the Oromos to power, where we are denied everything, of course, we have, where our leaders suffering from all kinds of injustice. We don't trust any democracy or what we are telling us. So what you need to do is simply to keep pressure on the government to release our leaders. I think the issue is not about now democratic election where we can win, but the issue for us, I think, as Professor Muhammad rightly said, where we privately discuss how we can spare the life of these beautiful people who simply give everything, abandon their education, abandon their life for us. That is the key. So I think this is simply the fight of every day. I think in the coming days. I know they may die because of hunger or because of lack of treatment. I know the situation in which they are in. So on the other hand, I think we can, on diaspora, we have to keep pressure on governments, foreign governments, to cut funding from this government, unless they simply respect basic human rights, unless simply these people are free, because governments can hold, because this country is in crisis. I think my friends are economists, they know what it is. Government doesn't have the money, doesn't have the resources. International financial institutions, the American government, European Union must simply ask the government to be accountable for prisoners who are really unjustly jailed, but also to improve conditions. So otherwise, I believe that the government simply shouldn't be receiving a penny from foreign government. I think we have to keep pressure, but I think on the other hand also the Oromo must unite. I know that it's always a luxury word. We couldn't succeed really to unify as always. This, of course, the division we have. They are dividing us. They are buying us. They are simply stealing. What they are doing with us also now dividing us, purchasing us. Basically, I think many people are now cheated with money. And so Oromos, please stop doing this. Stop being bought, because that is simply what killed us in the past and also what affects. So we have to unite. We have to say no to this government. And also we have to stand with our people and especially those in prison. And also we have to keep putting pressure on foreign governments and for the United Nations in order for us, of course, to see these people free. So I don't see about election. There is no election, and what we need to do is simply to keep our pressure on foreign governments and, of course, the United Nations in order to get these people released from jail. So, with respect to democracy, we don't trust, but the Oromo shouldn't be excluding the possibility of using struggle, all kinds of struggle, which simply leads us where we need. Because sometimes when justice is denied, when democracy is denied, the only way you can get simply your way is simply to stand for your rights. There is, of course, the Massachusetts Declaration, which simply justifies including armed struggle. Because if you are denied peaceful means of simply getting access to what you want, getting where you want to be, if you are denied justice, the Oromo have the right to have recourse to arms. This also it's very clear in the United Nations Charter, people have the right to self-determination. To do that, of course, they have the right to recourse to all types of struggle. So let us do this peacefully. We are urging the Abiy government to think thoughtfully, because that will be his end. If that's his end, he will go to the international court. I think this is not this is simply not a talk. This is not a talk. It is simply a reality. Professor Mohammed mentioned a document which simply stipulates Abiy committed a crime in Tigray, and also is committing crimes in Oromia. So now there are really ample documents to show that he has committed atrocities against innocent people, which simply amount to war crime. So I think it is still time to stop it. It's still time to open political space. It's still time to open political dialogue where these people must be consulted, where we can help this country. You cannot organize election. You cannot organize election at the expense of 50% of the Ethiopian population, the Oromos. You cannot win the war too if you go to war. So the only place where you can get resources when the country stands on its feet is simply Oromia. You don't destroy Oromia, and you don't destroy the country. So Abiy tends to tell us he is really, his objective is to keep Ethiopia together. But what he is doing in Tigray, what he is doing against Oromo leaders and Oromo community is simply not the best way of keeping Ethiopia together. So the best way is simply to release these people and to talk to them the best way forward. Otherwise, I think that is, of course, will be the end of empire, because we believe, as historians, we believe that the empires rise, go up, and don't go down, decline, and disappear. So maybe that is the situation if war breaks out. So still the time to spare all this situation.
Thank you so much for your take. And Dr. Hussein, I pose the same question to you. How do you assess the current situation, and how can the Ethiopian community, the Oromo community, and the international community evolve from this issue?
Thank you, Milko. I think, let me just separate the message to these different groups. The Ethiopian government, it is in its best interest, and it's in the best interest of the country to respect the rule of law, to release unfairly imprisoned political party leaders, members, and supporters, including the Oromo and non-Oromo political party leaders. Refrain from intervening in the election board's process. If not this election, but even in the future elections, if government intervenes in the electoral process to predetermine outcomes, to predetermine processes and outcomes, Ethiopia will not go any better, will not go anywhere any better. It is necessary, and it is in the best interest of the country, to create necessary conditions for free, fair, and credible elections. For some, it's already too late, but there is last-minute chance. And, I would like to urge the government and elements of the government to think and rethink that let's not waste this opportunity. Free political prisoners. It's costing you, it's costing the country. Respect the rule of law, meaning respect your institutions. The court, the police, all the judiciary system. For opposition parties, I haven't seen any opposition political party to that demanded government to release members or leaders of other opposition parties. Look, if government is not respecting one or two opposition parties, don't assume that your temporary position that you got from the government is sustainable. The government will come against you again. So I think opposition parties need to stand for each other, because they need to come as an alternative to incumbent government to make the country a better place, and the country to move to a democratic system. So they should demand the government to widen the political space. That's the basic question that political opposition parties should ask. They should try to bring competitive political alternatives, policy alternatives, if they are allowed. I'm not talking about even just the current, but even for the future. And hold election boards accountable, because the role of the election board is to play a non-partisan role, and respect and facilitate the voice of people, and respect the will of the people. So the opposition parties need to respect the will of people. When the people ask for them to refrain from meddling in their interest, they should stop. Ethiopian people, my message to the Ethiopian people: demand government to respect rule of law and free political prisoners. That should be the demand of Ethiopian people, not just the Oromo, but all others, because we are in this together as people of the country. Demand government can only assume power through fair, free, and democratic election. That is the minimum people should ask. Demand government and opposition parties respect the rule of law, and demand government media to stop biased and divisive reporting. And we've seen that even the media, the mainstream media, including government and some private, they are fueling, the divisions among the people. They are, hate propagating media. That's not helpful for the country. It's not sustainable. It's working against the interest of the people. They might think they are supporting one group against the other, and that's not helpful. For international, for Ethiopian diaspora community, my message is we should continue advocating for respect of human rights and release of, political prisoners, because that's the minimum that we have to do. Demand the government hold itself accountable and respect the rule of law, and work, by lobbying international community, because that's the minimum we can do. For international community, my message is one: exert diplomatic and economic pressure on Ethiopian government to demand, enforce, and respect the rule of law, protect human rights, work to alleviate humanitarian crisis, release political prisoners, respect the rights of detainees and prisoners, stop political interference in the election system, and facilitate conduct of free and fair election, and respect the will of the people in the end, including the processes, the outcomes. And Ethiopia will be better off if supported this way. It's not because the international community really benefits, but it is a legitimate demand because of your diplomatic pressure and economic economic leverage that you demand from the government, that these conditions need to be met, at least for the political prisoners that are on hunger strike. They need your support. They need your support. Other avenues are being exhausted. The only hope is that your pressure would force the government to yield to the demands of these political prisoners and at least show some humanitarian sympathy to release them and to allow them, even medical treatment in the interim.
Thank you so
That's what I would say.
Thank you so much for your take. And Professor Mohammed posed the same question in the last question to you. Due to the current climate, what message do you have, and how should we move forward to the Ethiopian government, to opposition parties, to the diaspora community, and to the international community? What is your message?
Thank you, Milko. Before I attempt to answer that, I would like to say a few words about genocide, war crimes. So evidence is slowly coming out of Tigray that the Ethiopian government may have committed war crimes. But I venture to say the government may have committed war crimes in Ethiopia, especially in Western Oromia, in Wallagga region, before they started this war with Tigray. So I'm fairly confident evidence will come out that shows massacres of innocent civilians in the west, in Wallagga, in Western Oromia, in Benishangul region, by militias that are backed by government security forces. Now, the government of Ethiopia, back to your question, Milko, the government of Ethiopia was brought to power by the movement of the people, specifically the Kero of Oromo. Now, the people can just as easily bring it down. So this government is, in a way, daring the people to do something. Really, the things they are doing are very belligerent to the extent of really what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like you can't do anything to me because we have guns, so we can do whatever we want. That is not really how it works. The people have more power than the government, even though the government has guns. So people power always wins. So what I would say to the government of Abiy Ahmed is this, like my friends mentioned earlier. One is this government doesn't have a mandate to make major political decisions. This government was put there to take the country to an election, a free and fair election. But what we're seeing now is the government is going to have a controlled election, not free and fair, a controlled election that guarantees they emerge the winners. So that is not going to be accepted by the people. We will be at ground zero all over again. So whether we have elections or not, the people already know this government is the winner. So it's predetermined. It's not going to change anyone's attitude. It's not going to change how people feel about this government. It's not going to change how the international community feels about this government. It's not going to change any minds. They should know that. So everything they're doing now, all of the resources they're spending on this sham election, if you ask me, that's a waste of scarce resources. The country is poor, but they're spending all kind of money they don't have on an election that is predetermined. So that is not going to work. So what I would say to them is, stop this nonsense, release all political prisoners, sit down and talk to them, and charter a course that is acceptable to everyone who is a stakeholder. That's what they need to do. To the people, as my friends said, the people, you get what you deserve. Okay, you really get what you deserve. If you don't struggle, this government is not going to give you freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to be owners of property. Your property rights as individuals and as people are not going to be respected under this government. So if you want better things for you, your family, your friends, and your people, you have to struggle. You have to stand up and be counted. You have to say no. That's the only way the people can emerge as winners. To opposition parties, no, this is a sham election, and don't take part, in my opinion, in this election, because you will end up legitimizing an illegitimate government if you take part in these elections. So I would suggest they refrain from taking part in this election. The OLF has already stated that they're not taking part in this election, and the Oromo Federalist Congress has hinted they most likely will not take part in these elections. I would say that is the right decision. Let them stand bare. Let people know that they ran an election unopposed, okay? Because taking part in these elections, like I said, the cost will outweigh the benefit. To the foreign governments and institutions, no, there is a massacre, a genocide going on in Ethiopia as we speak. The people of Tigray are hurting, they're suffering. A lot of civilians have been murdered, as we saw the videos published by the Telegraph. If these videos were not credible, a newspaper like the Telegraph would not have published it. So we have to assume it's credible. So that is an evidence of genocide against civilians. And more evidence, I suspect, will come out in coming days. So, in part, this government doesn't have the funds. In part, what they're doing with the assistance of money they get from other governments and other institutions, international institutions. So I would suggest you starve them of these funds, because this government is committing genocide on its own people. Now, to the diaspora, okay, the diaspora community, I would say keep up the pressure. We have to talk to legislators in governments where we live and make it known that the government in Ethiopia is repressive, genocidal, that is killing innocent people. Their soldiers in Tigray are raping women. They're killing children. So we have to make it known to the international community that the government in Ethiopia is genocidal. Uh, and the last thing I would mention here is that the government in Ethiopia, it has sustained itself for many years with the assistance of foreign governments and foreign institutions. So it's about time that foreign governments are held accountable for what they've been doing in Ethiopia. They have to stop supporting this government that commits genocide against its own people.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for discussing the ongoing crisis in Ethiopia and the implications and the consequences. I would like to thank our guests, first Professor Abbas Nyamo for joining us, Dr. Hussein Hamda, and to Professor Mohammed Tahiro, who have joined us today to discuss the current climate of Ethiopia. And I would like to thank you for tuning into WBC, and thank you. I am your host for today, and tune in next time to WBC Walabu Broadcasting Corporation. Thank you.
Thank you, Milko.
You're welcome.
Abbaa biyyaatu jooraa joortu jiraata boonaa harii sammuun nyaata tokko sabaaf of kennaa tokko garaaf jiraata hiriyaan dharaa silaa kokkolfaana